Welcome to the Report Card with Nat Malkus. On the Report Card, we evaluate research, policy, and practice efforts to improve the lives of families, schools, and students. One of those efforts that I've wanted to have a show on for some time is Career and Technical Education, or CTE. So today, I've invited Scott Stump, who is the Assistant Secretary for Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And with Scott, I want to discuss a paper that I've written on the evolution of career and technical education. But I don't want to ask myself questions, so I've asked Checker Finn, Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Fordham Institute, to host the podcast instead. Checker, take it away.
Ready, willing, and able, or as they sometimes say on television, locked and loaded. Back around 1959, speaking of 300 years, in the summer at Roosevelt High School in Dayton, Ohio, I, a high school student, took a typing course because I was going off to school, a boarding school as it turned out, and I needed to know how to type. And so I did learn. And I think if you looked at my high school transcript from around 1962, you would see a typing course on there. And your terrific, long and nuanced paper describes the evolution of something that in those days we did call voc ed, and that a lot of people had then began to look down upon because it was where the not very able kids went to class. Its evolution into something we now call career and technical education, CTE, in which a lot of people invest very high hopes. So my first question for you is whether this is just labeling. Is this like calling a janitor a sanitary engineer, or is something substantive going on?
That's a great question. I'll just sort of kick it off. I mean, the paper that I did looked at kids' transcripts over a long period of time because CTE is so popular right now as an education policy issue. I mean, if you just look at last year, we counted up governor's State of the State addresses, and CTE was mentioned more than any other education issue. Second to just teaching laws, CTE was the subject of more state legislation last year than anything else. And, you know, there's been lots of major legislation flying through Congress these past few years. That's a joke. It hasn't, but the Perkins Act passed on a voice vote. So, wow, everybody loves CTE. I wanted to take a look and just see the historical progression, in part to answer that question. Is this relabeling of voc ed, which when I was coming through graduate school and when I was in high school was sort of this stigmatized, sort of dead end. And I mean, I think that CTE evolved out of that. And Scott, maybe you want to speak to this more. It certainly evolved out of voc ed, but it's a much bigger tent now than certainly what we would have thought of as voc ed in 1990.
I note along the way that the department also changed the name of its unit from vocational education
to the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education.
Yes, sir.
There was a recent article that asked that same question. Is this just a fad? And at the end of the day, yeah, I think everyone is agreeing, no, it is not just a fad of changing a name. And, well, as my dad always used to say, or my father-in-law, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Well, you know what? This silk purse is here to stay. When it comes to the administration, and, I haven't gotten 300 years in, Checker, like you have, but I have 30 years in this business as a vocational educator and as a career and technical educator. And I would say that different than many other administrations that I've worked in this field under, we do have an administration right now that is making it a priority and is absolutely taking it head on to change the stigma about what is the role of career and technical education in the educational system.
And it's not just changing the name, it's changing what's going on.
Absolutely. And, really with Perkins 4, now we're going to dig into your report later on, but there's one piece of it that I really do find mirrors. We can actually quantify with data now the results of not just the change in business programs, getting rid of the typing and moving it lower, which it absolutely needed to do, which to me is encouraging that we can now say our programs have evolved over time to meet the changing needs of what students need and what employers need. But more importantly, if you look back at the early 2000s, right when Perkins 4 was being hatched and the career clusters were coming online, you also had only 6 divisions of CT at that point in time. You had the skilled trades, you had agriculture, you had business, you had family consumer sciences. But when the career clusters came on, it pushed it out into 16 broader categories that included STEM and IT, a lot of the creative industries. The health science really became an important component at that point. And so the umbrella absolutely widened to increase all of the careers in our economy. And I'll tell you, that's what the Secretary is hoping for as we continue to move forward, is we've got to bridge this gap between education and the economy. For the past 30 years, it's been widening. We've got to bring it back together.
Probably the most interesting thing in the paper for me was the distinction you made and then analyzed every which way between what you called traditional vocational and new era CTE. Why don't you tell us what you mean by that and why you did that distinction?
Sure. So first, just three main things I think are happening in CTE course taking over this time. Despite its popularity, CTE course taking has sort of been falling, and most of that is attributable to business courses and
my typing
concentrators.
course.
Yeah. And most of that business fall was that, when I was in high school, everybody took typing. So to become a concentrator, which is a student who takes 3 CTE courses within an occupational concentration, within business or construction or whatever. Well, the ubiquity of typing just made it really easy to become accidental business concentrator. Over time, of course, with the ubiquity of computers, typing just didn't have the premium. So it's not really something I'm that concerned about. And it's responsible for the bulk of the decline in CTE. So that's the one piece. But underneath that, I looked at course taking of what I call traditional vocational, and there is no perfect way to categorize these. These are just how they sort of made sense to me. And this would include transportation and manufacturing and construction, these kinds of trades. And those kind of concentrations, they actually did decline a little bit, led by manufacturing, but they were relatively stable. But the growth in CTE happens in these new era concentrations. So that includes communications, computer science, engineering. The main reason that I think of them as new era is because, stereotypes actually play a huge role in CTE because that's how we think about them. And these are sort of not the stereotype of your 1985 vo-tech classroom, right? They're not doing computer science and so forth. Part of that is obviously because the economy has opened up careers in these areas, but they've also grown from about 9% of concentrators in 1982 to 49% of concentrators in 2013.
In the category you call new era.
Yeah, this is the new era. And so they really spread over to make up a big portion of the CTE universe. And so I thought, wow, I want to see if this is just a growth trend or if they're actually sort of distinctive between those two groups.
As you develop that distinction through the paper, you also get to the point where you're describing the student populations that tend to go under the traditional and the new, and they turn out to look pretty different. The profiles of the student populations look pretty different in terms of the backgrounds and educational performance and other things. Can you amplify on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the first thing that I had transcripts in these different years, and I had test scores. And that's over time I had test scores. So I looked at the percentile on the math test in 12th grade of these different graduates. And what I found was that the traditional vocational students were within 1 point of the 38th percentile from 1982 to 2012. They're just dead flat. Now, it's worth stating here that if you're scoring voc ed programs, test scores may not be the best thing to look at, but that's still pretty remarkably steady. And then when you look at the new era concentrators, their scores trend up over time. So they start out, they're always a little higher than the traditional voc ed students, but they go closer to the average. And from 2000 on, they're within 1 point of the 50th percentile.
Of everybody in
high school. So I thought, wow, those new era concentrators really kind of look like they're scoring like average high school students. And the traditional vocational look like they're scoring where we would expect the voc ed students.
Pause for a sec with a basic factoid that I should have found in your report but didn't look for. Roughly what percentage of all high school graduates today or recently are CTE concentrators?
20%.
20 in 5 kid. 1 in 5 of the kids coming out of high school.
Right.
Have concentrated, meaning at least 3 courses in a related field in a cluster.
That's correct. And that's down from 40% in 1982. And the vast majority of that is due to business.
Okay.
There were just a lot of business concentration.
A lot of business, and then also the high school graduation requirements over the past 30 years being tied to higher ed admission requirements. The 4-year College for All agenda has pushed out a lot of students from being able to truly concentrate in a pathway.
Yeah,
because they had to take other courses in order to graduate.
Absolutely. The 4 of English, at least 3, in some cases 4 of math, and then 2 and 3 sequences of science, and then 2 years of foreign language for most students across the country, did not allow for them to fit into a program of study that included 3 courses in a CTE pathway.
So how valuable to the student is the concentration, the 3 courses? I was, until pretty recently, on the Maryland State Board of Education, and I got the impression from the many conversations we had about this that the educators think that three-course concentration is really important, but the employers don't necessarily see that as career-ready in their field.
Great point. Yeah, I would say that there are great discussions on both sides of that fence. What I would say that where most land is that students need in that early years of high school or going into high school at least some idea of, through a career interest inventory or some other path, to figure out an interest. And the first course becomes a test course to say, is this content that I really like? And then after that, once they finally land and gravitate towards one, what a true program of study would get them into a course that allows them to verify, yes, I want to be on that, and then into concurrent enrollment that becomes more what business would value, because at the end of that 2-course post-secondary sequence, you're well on your path to a certificate that an industry employer would value.
But you've just gotten into something that isn't front and center in Nat's paper, which is the integration with post-secondary for today's, call it new era CTE students. Is that an important consideration?
Absolutely, because the lines are being blurred between secondary and post-secondary education, and I think for the next decade, they're going to become more blurred of where high school ends and that post-secondary training begins.
Your paper describes ultimate sort of 4 years after high school, I think it was, educational completions for these two different populations of students. And if I remember correctly from your paper, the new era kids, concentrators, end up getting a lot more college.
They get college more than the traditional vocational education students. And this is 2-year, but mainly 4-year is where the real rub is. And what's interesting is, again, just like the test scores, they don't look any different from the average high school student. So they go at about the same rate. And actually, I found that consistently through a bunch of stuff, not only after college, but before. So sometimes you'll worry about selection effects in here.
Sure.
Like, well, if you just look at who concentrated, how do you know it was before? Well, with this 2013 data, I was able to look at a wave of data on the same kids that was gathered when they were freshmen in 2009. And when they were freshmen, there was already a big separation on all kinds of things, whether they and their parents expected them to go to college, when they passed Algebra 1, whether they felt a positive sense of belonging at school, whether grades were very important to get, and all these things, there's just a very marked contrast between the traditional vocational and the new era concentrators. I do want to go back really quickly to one thing you asked about the 3-credit concentrator.
Yeah.
And I think that everybody can agree that what we need is coherent CTE programs. And just because you got 3 credits, you could definitely not have a coherent sequence. So the measurements that I use are sort of rough proxies at how many people are interested in these things and in what amounts. I think it's always important to say that, the 3-credit thing is much less important than a coherent program. Yeah, a sequence. And that sequence should be designed to put, in my mind, especially for kids who are unlikely to go to post-secondary, we want CTE programs to put butts in jobs, right? I want kids to get out of high school with some on-ramp to a job. And part of my concern, therefore, is especially when these traditional vocational students are less likely to go on to post-secondary schools and have these other opportunities, at least immediately, then I think it's all the more important that we help them get onto career paths right out of high school.
And one of the big unknowns for me is to what extent are anybody coming out of high school, even if they're a CTE concentrator, ready at that point for a respectable job or the beginnings of a respectable career without additional training, whether it's from a community college or a 4-year college or an apprenticeship program or an on-the-job thing with an employer. How many actual high school graduates are job ready?
I will tell you, in your home state of Maryland,
I actually live there too. Yes.
Maryland apprenticeship is starting up, and they're actually going to have a signing day here coming up in the next 2 weeks. From Frederick and Hagerstown, both have apprenticeship programs for high school students.
This is what they call youth apprenticeships in Maryland, right?
Youth apprenticeships, but they are actually having a signing day where they are going full-time with those employers who are then going to take them on the next steps of not just being employed, but paying for whatever post-secondary education they need to fill out the rest of their education.
The employer will pay. That's cool. But push back. There are 24 jurisdictions in Maryland, and this is going on in 2 of them. So that's almost a pilot program.
It is. We've got 6 states that we're working with in that such pilot program, from Maryland to Kentucky to Oregon, that are all standing up at different ways to expand and scale those numbers so that it's not just for students in 1 or 2 school districts, but that it can be a statewide model.
So back to my hard question. Coming out of high school, having taken at least 3 related CTE courses, is anybody job ready at that point?
Would have to say that the vast majority of jobs, no.
Okay.
And we also know that those individuals are not recession-proof, especially hard to keep them in an economy and well-sustained during that time. And so the 68% of jobs, about 2/3, as we look to the future, are going to have some form of post-secondary education. And that's why we've got to take it deeper into through concurrent enrollment, high school students.
Post-secondary, or will the on-the-job apprenticeship employer-provided suffice?
Anything beyond the high school levels.
Literally
That's
post-secondary.
Post-secondary.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said 67%?
It's about 2/3.
Yeah, and that's trailing
67.
just behind the 69% of kids that are going to college, right? We have about 31% that are not going to college. I'm real concerned about them and making sure that, yeah, this is hard work. I don't think that we're doing great on it. I'm very concerned that we maintain a focus on those kids, not because we're doing a great job, but because if we don't maintain a focus on those students, what are we giving them? Like without career and tech ed, what possibilities are they getting? And that's, some of my worry. Also, just because 69% of students are going to college, 40% of those are not going to complete in 150% time. So there's plenty of work to be done on this side.
Well, you're dipping there into the question of the sort of negative unintended consequences of the college for everybody movement, is pushing a bunch of kids into college who are not ready or willing or able to succeed there for a whole variety of reasons.
And now we're contemplating the result of that, which is $1.5 trillion in student debt. Student loan debt.
Yes.
Individuals working their way through that.
And yet, proper thinking liberals want everyone to go to college still. I mean, this continues to be a big debate in the field. So, Nat, I want to come back to the student populations for just a second, because you didn't talk about this bit, but if I'm remembering correctly what I read, the traditional voc ed students in those fields are also coming from less educated families.
Yeah, their parents are less likely to have a bachelor's. Yep.
Less likely to have a bachelor's.
And again, I can say this over and over, but the new era concentrators look like everybody else.
But you are very clear in your very nuanced recommendations that we have to continue to pay close attention to these kids who are currently in the traditional population. That is to say, we can't just sort of say everybody should be new era. We have to continue to take this seriously as a path for kids who are not very academically inclined.
So here's another way to look at this. If you look at the gender of these concentrations, it should not be surprising, right? Construction is remarkably male. Healthcare, CTE, remarkably female. There's some reasons for this. Whether we like it or not, that's just the nature of these things. Same thing with some of the concentrations in sort of academic inclination. Academically disinclined students are not thinking, I really want to do IT, right. And actually, there's a little bit more of a bridge to IT than maybe some of that advanced engineering kind of stuff or so forth. These are generalizations, but if you look at the differences in the kind of kids, it's clear that the appeal is there for some kids. They just think, oh, well, I'm going to take the construction because it's the track for me. So it doesn't seem to me we're not going to beat the challenge of academic disinclination for all these kids. We're not going to turn them all into chemists, right? That's not everyone's
let alone think tankers.
God forbid. But our North Star should be that our education system should be focused on getting them not college and career ready, but career ready. And you hit on this in a glancing blow earlier, but one thing that we really have to recognize on this is that we may not be able to do this as well as we need to if we give as much freedom to kids' decision making as we prioritize. Now, right now, most kids take CTE. The bulk of their stuff comes in 11th and 12th grade. So that may not be enough time for them to move from whatever your average 10th grader is, especially if they're sort of academically disinclined, not that engaged, into a involved course sequence that gets them where they need to be by 12th grade. Now, we prioritize liberty, and we don't want to say, well, you chose to go into this carpentry track in 9th grade and you can't go anywhere else. So I totally understand the desire to have on-ramps and off-ramps to these programs for liberty's sake, but for efficiency's sake and for the quality of the training these kids might get so we get higher percentages of them job ready, we're going to run up against those choice things. And it's just, the German system with a single test and kids diverge at age 14, that's just not real popular in America.
Well, actually, on that point, besides the state board in Maryland, I've been stuck for the last 2 years on the Kirwan Commission, which has been trying to redesign K-12 education for Maryland. And the big report that came out a few months ago, which the legislature has agreed to in principle, we'll see if they agree to it in practice, recommends much more German, Swiss, Singaporean system in which at the end of 10th grade, during which everybody's done the same thing, the end of 10th grade, there's a forking, a branching, with quality CTE being one branch and university preparation or early college, high school being another branch. This is how a lot of high-performing countries do it. And we've gotten a lot of pushback from the CTE community on multiple grounds. But one of the grounds is what you just alluded to, which is that you can't wait till 11th grade to start some of these kids to figure out what they might want to be and do and give them some at least appetizers as to what that field is all about and what a course in that field might consist of. And indeed, we got a lot of advice that this should go back to middle school, that the sort of career thinking, career searching, career consideration.
Well, and that's where we're so pleased that the new Perkins Act gives states the latitude to go to early as fifth grade, so 5th through 8th grade.
With what? Go to
with career exploration and guidance. So the funds can be used to provide career counselors or tools and resources like interest inventories to students to have those conversations, meaningful conversations about what is it you want to do. Absolutely not tracking them or putting them in a box, but causing them to think, what value is your education going to provide? Because for too long, we've had education for education's sake, and it has not been connected in a student's mind to this will set me up for what I want to do next. And that's the connection and bridge we need to make in their brains.
So suppose a kid decides in 6th or 7th grade, I think I might want to work in the health field.
Absolutely. They ought to experience it. They ought to go hang out with either a doctor or a veterinarian for a day. My son early on thought he wanted to be a veterinarian, and we took him along to when our dog got spayed. And at the first sight of blood, he was done and gone out of the room. It's those kinds of formative experiences that allow you to say yes or no and keep on track or change your path. We've got to provide those experiences.
Well, it's interesting because that example is one that sort of cuts off the veterinarian angle.
Part of the dog.
Sorry to refer to the cutting off, but there's also the opening up. I have a little anecdote from when I was a teacher. I was teaching 7th grade in Prince George's County, Maryland, and my kids knew me, and one of these girls asked me, "What's your wife do?" My wife worked at a hospital, and this girl, she came from a low SES neighborhood, low SES household. Great kid, had tons of opportunity. And I said, she works at a hospital. And she said, does she work in the laundry? And I was blown away.
Yeah.
And then she said, well, does she work in the kitchen? And then she asked if she worked in housekeeping. And I just thought, wow, you and I have a real different set of first choices as to who works in there.
That was the range.
Yeah.
So acquainted with.
Right. And nurse was like last, and she never asked if she was a doctor. So just the idea that in middle school, a lot of kids we need to open these things up to, I think that makes a great deal of sense.
So I want to come back to the kid who doesn't get turned off by the sight of blood and in 7th grade or 8th decides more certainly they want to go into the health field. When, in your view, should they start taking a course in school that relates to the health field? Under the Kirwan recommendations, we might let them taste something, but we would really not let them into anything serious till 11th grade.
You're sounding much like our institutions of higher education that take gen eds for your first 2 years and you don't touch a practical course until you get to be a junior in college. Mm-hmm. My contention is we shouldn't separate off the technical and academic content. Once a student is interested in that area, we need to feed that passion at the freshman level on, be giving them experiences that, again, continue to reinforce that choice or push them in a different direction.
And you already alluded to the challenge of doing that along with English, math, science, history, foreign language, art, and all the other things that we want the 9th grader to be taking.
Absolutely. But how does that content make sense unless they're putting it into practice at the same time they're thinking about their future career context?
Different question, but you've already alluded to it. You both have. How important is the federal role in all of this? If the Perkins Act went away, would CTE continue to thrive in American education, or is this really a kind of a linchpin of career and technical education? You can first speak on your own behalf, and then I want to know what Matt thinks.
Well, and I have played this both from the federal level for the past 9 months, but for the prior biggest part of my professional career, I was at the state level as a state director of career and technical education.
In which state?
In Colorado. Our office was unique because we covered both the community colleges and the K-12 system of CTE.
Okay.
So we were able to pair the pieces together in a little bit of a different way. But I will tell you, the federal investment is critical. And since 1917, as the paper alludes to, I would call it the little act that could, because it's only $1.3 billion, which in the federal scheme of things is not that
It's a rounding
much.
error, we say these days.
It is. But it drives as only 7% of our nation's investment, because 93% is covered by local mill levy dollars and by state dollars. And as a local school board member, we still made decisions based on kind of the greater fabric of CTE that Perkins set up as to how we invested our local dollars. And so would CTE remain and exist without Perkins? Most likely, yes, because there are local leaders on school boards like I was that are absolutely going to want to prepare kids for the economies in our areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think CTE would survive without the Perkins shot in the arm. I think it is a shot in the arm. I think what are they called? The alignment plans that are designed, that they say you got to get a bunch of stakeholders in the room and you got to align these to the economy. I think that's tough work.
Local needs assessment.
There you go. Local
That's
needs
the new,
assessment.
and that is the cool new part of Perkins, is a requirement that you need to align to local labor data. The other thing that's new in the act that will absolutely be the piece that it'll be interesting to see, Nat, how it impacts the data set conclusions you have coming out of this data and how it changes the next set, is there also needs to be a local gap analysis in the population served by program. Because it's only when you get to the program level that you start to see these differences in the student populations. Every 2 years, as programs fill out their local applications, they're going to have to look at that disaggregated data and say, how are we making sure that we're serving all of these populations in absolutely the best way possible?
Yeah, and I'll jump on again and say, by and large, when I looked at Perkins accountability requirements, of course, I'm a policy guy, so I got to find things to complain about, and I did, but by and large, I think they're great. It's great that they're disaggregated. It will give us a view. The main thing that I come at in the paper with is to say, I'm worried most of them concentrate on individual programs. And so program by program, we're worried about quality. And you can make investments in all those programs, but still your portfolio might not do everything that you want it to do. And again, if we have this expanding new era sector that appeals to more academically inclined students and a slow but steady dwindling of academically disinclined students, I got to tell you, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to say we must keep a North Star on the academically disinclined, right? We always have to do that because those who are academically inclined, they're going to college at the same sort of rates as everybody else. We're going to spend more money on them later, and they're going to have more career opportunities. But for the kids who aren't going to end up going to college, this may be their last best chance. So I want to just make certain that we don't lose sight of that. And of course, everybody's going to talk about CTE in aggregate because we don't even have time in this podcast to mention all 16 career clusters. So it's hard to keep your track on those.
3, 4, yes.
It's important to just make sure because it does look, I'll tell you this, it does look like what was going on in the 80s, what Jeannie Oakes and so many other people uncovered was that there's tracking and it's between academic programs and vocational programs. And that's bad. We don't want disadvantaged kids going in there and academically disinclined going in there for a dead end. And there's some things reminiscent of that, but it's under the CTE tent, where you have a traditional vocational track that looks pretty different from the new era track. And it's important, I think, to fight against that.
Parenthetically, the traditional track, has it shed mostly the woodworking and sheet metal of yesterday in favor of things that actually do relate to today's jobs, the traditional part of CTE?
Yeah, Scott can probably answer better than me. From the data that I looked at, I couldn't get down to like the course level, and even there, they're just names of courses, so you don't know what it is. I will tell you a couple of things. One is that there's a big difference between a career academy that is set up to do CTE and then a comprehensive high school that sort of does CTE as it's always done it. And of course, all those schools are working on improving their programs, but those are slow to improve because it's just not where their focus is.
I want to come back to that distinction between the two kinds of high schools in a second, but first just on the shedding the antiquated stuff. Is that happening?
Well, and that's where I would say back to our earlier conversation about the federal investment, that is critical because the number one issue in standing up a quality program and keeping it quality, especially in manufacturing, where a CNC milling machine costs not just thousands of dollars, but lots of thousands of dollars to be able to be on the cutting edge in manufacturing as it's evolved. We do need that federal investment, which is targeted at equipment and keeping the programs up to date and keeping the instructors up to date in their capacity to teach the new era skills.
Well, that's idealistic. If you've always taught woodworking for your entire career and you've got another 10 years to teach before you can retire, are you going to pick up a new role, or are you going to keep teaching woodworking and hoping you can talk some kids into it?
Yeah, and that's the push. Historically, it was the local advisory committee. When the first round of Perkins, called the Smith-Hughes Act, it required a local advisory committee to advise on the curriculum and the equipment. I will tell you, as a community in CTE, we have let the advisory committee slide over the past 3 decades. And that's part of the reason why the local needs assessment was put in this act, was to very clearly say, this is what the program needs to include. This is the equipment that they need to be working on. These are the tasks that they need to be doing, so that they're prepared and ready to move on to the next step of education or into the workforce.
Yeah, and this is where the Department of Ed just can't get enough purchase to actually make the difference here. This is where you need local districts to make sure that the programs that they set out are going to put kids in jobs where they need them.
But they've got tenured teachers.
They do indeed. And I've read some things about this. There is not only, staying on the path that we are already on with standard operating procedures and current staff, but there's also, to some degree, you're running up against school system interest and union interest together when they want to keep their staff right now, where a lot of this career technical education probably needs some instruction from folks that aren't traditional teachers, but
which bumps right into the certification and licensing.
Yeah, exactly.
That states are also wrestling with.
Some states it's miserable to get an employer to serve as an instructor.
Yeah.
That's ludicrous when you have someone that is that well trained in the industry to limit their ability and cause them to take so many courses and credits.
I want you to come back to the 2 kinds of high schools, because in one of your many very nuanced sidebars.
I think there's 5 sidebars in this paper. I was going for a record. I'm not sure what it is.
If I read the nuance correctly, you said that when looking at whether CTE actually helps kids, believe you said that the Career Academy version of high school appears to help kids more than the standard high school that just does CTE as part of what it does.
Yeah, my read of the literature, and it's hard to know whether the literature is complete. And it's also, it may be that it's very difficult to randomize student course selection, but you can randomize Career Academy and so forth. Part of this could be the drunk looking for his car keys under the lamppost. That said, it does appear that very coherent programs, invested programs, career academies, these sorts of things, with lots of counseling, with a clear path and a clear destination for the students, that those are the places where you find studies that show sort of causal benefits. That doesn't mean that other CTE programs don't do it. It's just I'm not seeing a whole lot of evidence there. The reason that I wanted to put this there is that also makes sense to me. I just think coherence in these programs
or in any school,
in
any
kind,
school,
absolutely.
Yes.
But specifically in this one, you have more of a near-term drop-off point. If you want to do this thing where you're trying to get kids in jobs, then hopefully the idea is you say, we will give you advanced training specific to getting you in this job if you agree to work towards that job. All right, now we need more coherence than a sort of liberal arts preparatory college prep.
Yeah, and I had the chance last fall to visit McGavick Career Academy in Nashville. Absolutely. They have 7 different pathways from finance to STEM to aviation to healthcare to criminal justice to agriculture. And this is where it makes a difference. Historically, vocational education was a path to what I would call a terminal degree or a dead end. And, the secretary is absolutely against dead ends. Our economy doesn't work like that anymore, and it's not best for those students working their way through it. But the career academies do package together multiple pathways for students out of any of those core disciplines that they're in. Because criminal justice, you can go right to work as a police officer or after you go through a post academy. Those that are wanting to go on and continue as a legal aid or possibly even all the way to an attorney, out of that one career pathway, you can go to immediate employment, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, all the way to a doctorate or professional degree. So how do we make sure those are available to more students?
When our Maryland Commission tried to recommend that these career academies should be the wave of the future and that existing high schools should basically either convert to career academies or shed their CTE to the career academies, we got a huge amount of pushback.
I imagine.
Huge amount of pushback from the districts.
Well, I know I had a friend that texted me when I first to let him know that I got this job. When I hired him in Colorado, he says, I remember the day when you told me that, yeah, we're going to take CTE and take over education, that all education ought to be about planning for and prepping you for what's next in life. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, everybody needs to be in that capacity to work a career or to be a great community citizen. He said, I didn't know you were going to take it to all of the United States. And I'm saying, yeah, you know what? We are.
But let's talk about capacity at the school level for a minute, because you've got 16 career clusters, and you're a little high school or you're a little district in the mountains in Colorado, or you're just a little district with one high school. How much of this can you realistically deliver to the students in your community? And if not, then what?
I know. And there is commonly a misnomer that things can't happen in the rural areas. And I will tell you, we're not in the mountains. We're out on the eastern plains where it is a high desert with 13 inches of water a year, 25% humidity, 300 days of sunshine a year. It's a happy place. But
it's only got 87 kids in its high school.
You hit the number almost exactly. If we just had in-district students in our school district that's 45 miles tall by about 35 miles wide, we have 86 kiddos. Preschool through 12th grade.
Yeah.
207 because Colorado for a long time has been allowed choice for parents to move across district lines, open enrollment. And we have 2 career and technical education programs in the district, business and agriculture. And as we look at it, those 2, plus the fact that we have good cooperation with our community colleges. My daughter is headed into a health pathway, starting her CNA next spring or next fall as a junior in high school going into her senior year. My son that wanted to be an engineer, as he went through the test as an 8th grader, I had the conversation with him and said, all right, Brady, as you look to high school, what courses will best suit you for that? Well, he took the agriculture pathway and spent time in the shop and fabricated a nice little luggage carrier for the back end of our big old GMC Yukon. When he got to CSU, Colorado State University, he was the only one in his mechanical engineering path when they went to the lab who had ever touched metal and welded before. So as long as we think broader about these categories and use them as a conduit to multiple pathways.
But if the high school offers agriculture and business and the kid wants to do health professions, what happens?
That's where Emma connected in through the community college. So we use our partners that are close to us and through concurrent enrollment and agreements. And Ross wanted to do IT. And you know what? We had no app developers in our school, not even within the business department. And so most of his was done online through independent study.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that there's a challenge here. You can't have 16 career academies just because
much less the subheadings within them.
I think that part of this is you're going to have to make some bets, and you're going to have to get together with a bunch of people that know the business side, know where the demand is, and have some things aligned. And I think a few good programs are better than infinite choice.
Yes.
So I encourage people to make bets. But I visited a high school doing some field work not too long ago. It was a career academy high school. They had 3 different career academies. And as I talked to the guy, I was telling him about these findings that were going to come out soon. And he was like, yeah, it's a little bit like that here. We have a communications career pathway and it fills up. And then there's sort of an application process to it. And if you don't have good grades or if you have sort of some behavior issues, you're probably not going to get in it. And then there's like the trades one. And believe me, everybody can get in the trades one because there's just always excess space. And the middle one is usually reasonably full. It sounds a lot like a story I've heard before, you know, and that gets a lot of criticism. And I don't know enough about that program to know whether it's good or bad. I do know one thing, that if that lower track doesn't actually deliver real options to kids, then there's no hope for it. If it actually does, then it may be a lot more productive than sort of the college for all high school where we just kind of get you in some nebulous readiness, but not for any one thing, especially when 30% of the kids aren't ready for much.
You have, in effect, there, in that example, described a kind of tracking within the CTE program.
Yeah, the whole high school CTE, everybody's going to get a concentration because they made it all career academies. Again, this is the sort of thing, like if you just look at test scores or graduation rates, if you include everyone in the tent, then the overall statistics that are used to describe CTE, they're going to look more average, which is what they've done over time. Again, I don't think that's necessarily wrong, as long as we don't let it shift off of the kids that, let's face it, are the hardest kids to educate. I mean, they are.
And our job is to get all students the right skills at the right time for the right next step in their career and life. And we've got to make sure that we deliver on that promise.
I'm going to treat that as your final comment. I want to give Nat one more, which is to say at the end of your paper, when you get into the discussion part, Talk about nuanced. I was trying to distill out of your discussion part something, this is Washington after all, that I might call policy recommendations. What are your top 3 suggestions going forward based on what you've learned in the course of this analysis?
Wow, top 3.
Or 1 or 2 or 4.
Well, I'll give you a couple, and they're all sort of variations on a theme. I mean, the first one is we need to make sure that we don't consume CTE as if it is a blended soup. It is not. It is very, there are different layers in there, and they're doing different things, so we need to pay attention to those things. I also think that the increasing market share of CTE programs that are in these new era subject areas that are appealing to academically inclined students, that develops some perverse incentives for CTE folks, because the more academically inclined students we can bring into the CTE tent, the better our numbers are going to get, just by nature. That doesn't mean we shouldn't bring those kids into some CTE programs. It means we can't let that displace the key focus for kids who aren't going to go to post-secondary. And that also means, maybe finally, is let's think about this in dollars. Our marginal CTE dollar now is just as likely to go to a kid who's college going is going to match that of every other kid as it is to the crew that is just not likely to go to a 4-year college. And so that marginal dollar deserves attention.
Good stopping place for a Washington policy discussion. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Nat. I believe we're over and out.
Well, thank you, Checker, for guest hosting on the report card, and for Scott for joining us. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our team of producers. That includes Amy Cummings, Sophia Gallo, Macy Heath, and Gage Hurley. You can subscribe to the report card on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast player. I believe Stitcher is Checker's favorite podcast player.
Every day.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating and review on iTunes or Google. It helps other folks find the show. If you have any comments, questions, or topic suggestions for future episodes, you can reach us here at ed.podcast@aei.org. For Scott Checker and all of us at AEI, until next time, I'm Nat Malkus.